Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Today we're going to paint some decades-old minis with some brand new paint. The paint was sent to me as an early sample, and I've had these minis for many years. Painting nights is a fantastic excuse to use a ton of bright, vibrant colors. Each mini will give us a chance to experiment with a new paint scheme. If we wanted to, we could even develop a set of family heraldry for each of these guys. About 5 years ago, I got a pretty good Craigslist deal that included a collection of Bretonnian Knights. There were some Tomb Kings in there too. I was able to fix up 8 Knights of the Realm from 2004. The previous owner did a pretty good job of assembling them, but I still had a bunch of mold lines to scrape. They cleaned up well enough, and I think this is going to be a good size for a project. For the bases, I started with some fine grit texture paste and sprinkled some sand and pebbles on top. I got them primed with flat, new terracotta paint and primer from Behr. This is my first time trying this one. I really like the light terracotta color as a primer. It's a great undercoat for skin, fur, leather, dirt, and all kinds of other stuff. This color is easier to paint over than black, and it's not going to narc on you if you miss a spot the way that white will. This bottle of primer ended up being a bit hydrophobic and giving me a little bit of beading on the first coat of paint, so that's not ideal. Other than that, I quite like the primer. Okay, strategy time. I want every knight to be unique, but I also want them to look good when they're all ranked up next to each other. I'm going to pick a few colors to standardize across all of them. They're all getting the same color steel armor, the same color lances, and eventually they'll get the same color of leather riding tech. Realistically, we'd expect them to have a lot of variations in their gear, but I want to standardize a couple of colors across the squad to give them some coherence. Of course, they're all going to have the same colors on their bases as well. I like to get a start on the bases early. This helps give context to all of the other choices that we'll need to make later. We need to make a lot of color choices when we're painting knights, so we might as well try to pick up a bit of momentum wherever we can. Next up, horses. This is a logical early step since the horses are underneath everything else. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes trying to paint all the horsey bits, so we should try to get them done early in the paint job. I picked a couple of grays and browns to spread around the squad. Horses come in lots of different colors. For now, my goal is to get one base coat color on each animal. If we feel the need, we can always add some spots or stripes or something like that later on. Moving ahead, the lances get a standard color. It would be perfectly reasonable to give them different color lances, and we can always change our mind. But I have a feeling that standardizing them will avoid some migraines when we're looking at the whole squad later on. Here's the state of affairs. We have made it to the fun part. It's time to make each of these knights colorful and unique. My overall plan is to pick 2 or maybe 3 colors that look good together for each of these minis. I'm drawing inspiration from sports teams, company logos, plus some of my own personal favorite color combinations. One of the challenges with painting a group of knights is that we need to make a bunch of choices for every model. There's a high risk of decision paralysis. If we were painting just one model, we could overthink every choice. But here we gotta make some quick calls and live with them. Some knights are gonna look awesome and end up in the front line. The others are gonna be at the back of the unit to fill it out. Some knights were born into families with dumb colors and dumb heraldry. It's all part of the canon. Across the unit, I want to use a wide variety of colors, and I also want to use a variety of patterns in placing those colors. Bretonnians are prone to a problem that I like to call the quiver problem. How many shades of brown does it take to paint a quiver? Well, the quiver is probably brown leather, and it's probably attached to a brown leather belt, and there might be some stitching on the quiver, and the inside lining of the quiver might be a different shade, and the shafts of the arrows might be brown wood, and all of this is in the same place on the mini. It's not too stressful, but planning how to paint an archer is a bit of a logic problem. Well, on a knight you might have capes, pennants, tabards, barding, quilted heraldry, and painted heraldry, and you might be trying to use just 2 colors for all of that. On this blue and yellow knight, I did my best to alternate blue and yellow around the whole model. I don't want to accidentally make several blocks of blue all end up in the same area. Now realistically, the painted shield wouldn't be exactly the same color as the dyed wool. I'm choosing to ignore that reality on this model, and I still think it looks okay. For some of the knights, I did use multiple shades of the same color for different materials. It adds a bit of realism, but I don't think it's strictly necessary. As a separate topic, the light terracotta color of the primer is a great choice as an undercoat for red, orange, and yellow. These colors can be a bit translucent, and the warm, fleshy terracotta underneath adds to these colors in a benevolent way. So far so good with the coverage of these Army Painter Warpaints Fanatic though. Even the yellows, reds, and oranges. Decision fatigue was starting to become a serious issue, and I had to force myself to keep making judgment calls to push all of these forward. The spirit animals on the helmets are gonna be gold. I guess the knights all go to the same artisan to get these commissioned. This guy's tabard is gonna be a lime green. This'll break up all of the orange and yellow, and we'll get to experience the joy of the Knight of Citrus. Lemon, lime, and orange. In the locker room, everybody's making fun of him for his stupid green tabard, but then he hops into the saddle and they realize that this is the Citrus Knight, and he's an absolute madman. By now I'm exhausted by making color choices, so let's see where we're at. We are deep in the ugly phase for all of these minis, but I do see a lot of potential here. Up until now, I've been exclusively using this big size 8 synthetic brush to get colors down fast. It's time to trade it in for something a bit smaller. I've got a monster size synthetic brush from the Army Painter. I'm going to use that to be a little more precise. Let's get a start on all the leather tack. I'm going to use the same shade of brown on all of the belts, straps, saddles, reins, and scabbards. I decided to standardize the color for leather. The unit is so busy with other colors that I think our subconscious minds are going to really appreciate a bit of cohesion. Tracing all of these straps is time consuming, but it's an important step in getting these minis neatened up and pulling them out of the ugly phase. The brown that I chose is doing a pretty good job of covering in a single coat, and that's going to save us a whole bunch of time. We are moving in the right direction. We'll switch brushes and start in on my favorite step, black lining. I've got a size 1 natural hair brush from Monument Hobbies, and I'm going to use it to paint the edges and borders of things black. This is a way to add definition between the color blocks. There are some textures on these models that'll take a wash pretty well, but there are also a whole lot of big flat areas on the horses and the shields that probably won't look great if we try to wash them. Black lining is a step that takes a while, but I enjoy it. It's mindless, it's relaxing, and it's a nice way to add contrast while keeping our main colors clean and vibrant. I still make a lot of mistakes, but that's why I'm putting in the practice. Okay, I've got a few more heraldry choices to make that I've been putting off. There are stencils and decals available to put designs on these shields, but I'm going to do some very, very simple freehand. This green shield is getting a couple of chevrons. I'm putting a pale blue cross on my beige knight. I can just about draw a heart. This isn't fancy, but I think it'll do. The horses need some more work. I painted the inside of their mouths purplish red, and then gave their teeth a medium bone color. I used a dark bone on the hooves, and I'll use a dark steel on the horseshoes. Alright, it's time for washes. Dark tone for the plate mail and the chain mail. I'm not going to put any washes on the big flat areas of these models, but this looks really good on the deep texture of the armor. The washes from Army Painter have always been pretty great. I also put either brown or gray wash on the tails, faces, and legs of the horses. That'll give them a more organic look. When the wash dried, I did my best to paint their eyes with light gray, followed by a black dot. So in the background, I've been experimenting with some infantry color schemes. These models are 3D prints from Titanforge. Among other things, I used these to finalize my plan for the bases. Over the brown, I'm putting splotches of dark olive green. I'm not a big fan of grass flock, so I want to paint a grassy effect onto these bases. Next up are smaller dots of a lighter camo green. Finally, I'm stippling on just a bit of bright leafy green. The 3 shades of green were placed more or less randomly, but now I'm painting the larger stones and pebbles with a cool medium gray. After that's dry, I'm coating everything in strong tone. This will darken it down and blend things together. All in all, this is a pretty quick way to do bases, but I think it looks good, and it's more durable than if I were to glue on flock or tufts of grass. So here's where things stand. Not too bad. I need to do one more pass on each model to address a few details and neaten things up. This can be a long process, but neatness counts for a lot. Just for fun, here's a Bretonnian bowman that I painted more than 20 years ago. All of my eyes came out funny back then, but I don't think it's a terrible paint job. Bright and vibrant colors are fun. Blue and yellow has always been a winning combination for these guys. Solid blocks of color and neat borders in between them count for a lot. This mini is also the root of why I don't like grass flock. Maybe I'll learn to use it someday. Anyway, here's a modern version of a peasant archer from Titanforge. The detail that sculptors can put onto 3D prints these days is awesome. Once I decide on colors, I'm going to paint up a little force for some games of Saga. But of course these minis could also be used for Warhammer Fantasy, or The Old World, or Kings of War, or one-page rules, or whatever else tickles your fancy. Alright, I'm finally happy with these knights. Let's take a look. I love the yellow and blue. I only used one shade of each across different types of cloth and the painted shield, but it works. This is a classic right here. Next up, the Knight of Love. We've got 4 distinct colors on here: purple, pink, red, and yellow. All stuff that you'll find on a Valentine's Day card. Here's my beige knight. I used 3 different shades of beige for the major color blocks, and I gave him a pale blue cross for heraldry. Knights like crosses, and I figured a pale version of Finland would look pretty good. Now I still haven't decided how I want to do the heraldry on this guy. He's showing up to the tournament with a solid green shield. I used a couple of shades of blue, a couple of shades of green, and a relatively large amount of gold metallic. He looks okay as he is. Here's the Autumn Knight. In retrospect, the horse armor is too close to the green of the base, but in general, I love this combination of greens, ochre yellow, and reddish orange. The chevrons are a nice bit of variety. Ah, the English Knight. 3 shades of red, a bit of yellow, and a hawk instead of a lance. As I was exploring the Fanatic paint range, I was a bit surprised that the red on the horse armor is actually the darkest red in the whole paint line. It's a good thing that I'm painting knights instead of vampires. Okay, purple and teal. Purple and teal are a powerful combo, so I only wanted to use them on the shields. I wanted to use a neutral color for the majority of the cloth. I wanted to use a very dark gray, but it turned out that the darkest gray in the line was much lighter than I had in mind, so I used a black instead. In general, this Fanatic line has more bright colors than it does dark colors. Speaking of bright colors, here's the Citrus Knight. He would have looked great without the green, but I'm glad we gave it a try. No regrets. Here they are, the front line of a glorious charge. For all of these knights, I could have gone harder with the heraldry, but that's probably a whole other video. I think the scene is busy enough as it is. There's tons of individuality here, but looking at this isn't giving me a headache, so I think we'll count that as a win. This was a nice chance to celebrate some classic models and experiment with different color schemes. This was a sandbox of Bretonnian Knights to explore this new army painter Warpaints Fanatic. I found that I got a lot of use out of the way these paints were grouped into families. This was useful on the paint desk, but I think it'll also be handy when shopping for individual bottles of paint at the store. I still have a lot to learn about this paint, but my initial impressions are good enough to keep it on my paint desk for a while longer. Alrighty, that's enough feudalism for today. Thanks so much for watching.